Really? We're starting now, right?
Thanks everyone for coming today. My name's Neal, Shyam. This is Nick.
Marino.
The Marinos. And
I wish.
thanks so much for coming to our session, which is called I've Started a Podcast, Now What? Nick and I started the Audio Shocker podcast about 5+ years ago.
Yeah, see, it's there in the logo. That means it happened.
It happens. It's history. And I think starting a podcast is great, and you get a chance to do it, you totally should. Actually, how many of you out there have a podcast, review podcast, or something like that? Perfect. I mean, it's like why you're here, right?
Wait, one more time? Okay.
And how many of you want a podcast? You think it'd be a really awesome thing to do?
So pretty much everybody here either has one or they're trying to do one. Okay, got it. Good. You're in the right session.
We want to do this session because I think it's really cool to come up with the idea of a podcast. And you're like, all right, cool, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna start recording stuff, but it's kind of hard to keep it going for a really long time. And I think we've come up with a few ways that we've made it successful, and that it's something we actively look forward to doing every other week now. I mean, we originally started every week, then we sort of reset some of our expectations.
Well, every other week for you. It's a little bit different from me.
Right. So for me, Nick records podcasts like 3 times a week. I mean, he's a machine.
Literally, I'm not a human. We can talk about it after the session.
That's right. So I think Nick is definitely like the podcast guy. So he's going to be the one who can answer pretty much every single question you've ever had about podcasting.
My goal with this session is to help people from falling into podcast purgatory, which is where I see a lot of people slip into with their material. They start something and then it languishes. And I think it's because you need to set a few goals from the beginning. You need to have a foundation built, and that's all what this worksheet is here. Does everybody have one of these worksheets? If you don't, we got them up front. Feel free to come get one or holler at me. I can bring one to you. And this is going to be a little simple thing we're going to walk you through to help you build a foundation. Now, if you've been podcasting for a while, some of these things are things you might have already thought of. But, I guess, is there anybody out here that feels like the content with their podcast is struggling a little bit, or they're having a hard time with consistency or schedule or things like that? Why are you raising your hand? You're on our website already.
It's pretty up one that dude.
Killing me. All right, so we got a hand from Sword in the back. Thank you, Sword. But even if you're not struggling with that, the idea of this is to have a solid base so that you can maintain and grow. I think that's the idea behind it, because nothing disappoints me more than when somebody has a great idea for a show and they have a lot of passion for it, but it just doesn't continue on in a strong way.
Yeah, absolutely.
There we go. You got something to say after that?
No, I think we should just sort of start talking about the concept of 4 C's.
All right. Well, when I was pitching this session, I was like, man, I need to come up with something catchy. And I was like, all right, well, what if I do one of those letter things where you have a bunch of things that begin with the same letter, and you could put a number in front of it. So I came up with the 4 C's, and I think even though it was kind of an impromptu thing, I think it really reflects what an ideal foundation for a podcast can contain. So the first one we have is concept, and to explain that simply, the idea behind what I'm hoping to get from you guys here is a short sentence about what your podcast is about. Now, here's the thing. There's nothing wrong if that evolves over time, but the idea is to start with something, a core idea that you can work with, and make it as simple as possible. If you want to take a second to write something down, we'll give you 15 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, sort of some background.
Play along at home and write something down.
Our podcast that we started, the Audio Shocker podcast, sort of like the first podcast we started, was more about just pop culture. For example, it's the same conversation that Nick and I would have every Sunday, and we break down like the 3 things we saw that week, or 3 things we listened to, or whatever. And so that kind of became the concept of that podcast. It wasn't something that was super cemented. I think we tried at first, and it didn't work so well. And sort of over time, as Nick says, this can evolve, and it doesn't have to be one thing forever. But you want to know that your podcast has some direction, and people are going to always tune in to listen to, or they know what your podcast is about very simply. It's like the small elevator pitch that you would tell people.
Yeah.
What's your podcast about?
If I had to write down what we were 5 years ago, I would have written down something maybe like opinions on movies, music, and more. But nowadays, if I had to write it down, the slogan I'm using nowadays for the Audio Shocker is uncensored pop culture criticism and comics creation conversation. And to me, that sums up the majority of the output that we have on our website. Right? Just to give you a quick overview, if you're not already familiar with audioshocker.com, we have approximately 3 episodes a week. It really varies from week to week. Sometimes we have 4, sometimes we have 1. It just depends when you show up to the site. Our flagship podcast, like Neal was saying, is kind of something where we're riffing on a few things that we've been experiencing. Let's say a few different things in media. Sean, for example, over here has a show in the Audio Shocker called Jello Shots. Dan and Sean and I have a show called Sequential Underground, which is all about creating indie comics, like comic books. And so on. We have different shows kind of themed like that. And I can't encapsulate them all within the concept, but I do feel like that slogan I said just now represents kind of like the basic idea as a whole.
Right, and it sort of prevents like a creep, right? Like if your podcast does evolve to encompass other things, that's great, but if you can keep it focused, you'll be able to talk very intelligently about just a few things, and people will be like, oh, they're the experts on that one thing, right? And it helps you narrow what you're going to talk about. You don't wander off topic. You don't sort of get bored with it, and keeps you very focused.
It's kind of ironic coming
from me.
You, yeah.
Yeah. It's true though.
It's not true. We'll get to that in character. So let's move on to consistency, because I think concept is really the most basic one. There's not too much you need to say about that, really, unless anybody has any questions about the concept side of things. Consistency, for me, is a huge thing, and when I found that I could maintain the consistency, that was a humongous motivating factor for me. And I think it really is about just showing up and doing it. Sometimes you're not in the mood, just show up and do it. We don't skip. It really comes down to that. We just don't miss episodes. And start a schedule, and there's nothing wrong with shifting the schedule. But when you tell people a schedule, I think you have that sort of unspoken contract with that listener. This is where we're going to put our material out. That's my opinion, of course. Now, not everybody agrees with me. The way we have the first line set up is my podcast will blank. My podcast, I forgot a word in there. I should say my podcast will post blank times, either a week, month, or year. Hey guys, grab a couple of these worksheets here. Here, bring one back so far. And pick whatever you want. My personal recommendation, when I talk to people, when I consult people about starting a new podcast, starting a new blog, I say to them, take whatever, if you've never done this before, take whatever schedule you think you can maintain, and then have it. So if you think that you can post, twice a week, then you should probably start out weekly, because there's going to be a chance you're not going to be able to maintain that twice a week thing. It's when you haven't done it before, I like to say it's always more work than you think it is. So for podcasting, if you're like, oh, I could do that weekly, start off bi-weekly. There's nothing wrong with surprising people and moving up to a weekly schedule. I mean, that's only going to be a pleasant thing for people who are tuning into what you're doing. Moving on to the next line. Now, Neal didn't necessarily think that we should have done this next line of stuff. I'm a little bit more into this than he is. I believe, and there are like internet statistics out there that you can research if you want to. The most
all you're going to get them. You're not going to tell them where or anything like that because you don't really know.
No, I mean you can just Google this stuff, and you can say which days of the week are the most traffic days for websites and stuff like that. You're going to consistently find Monday to Wednesday is the most highly trafficked time on the internet, and you're going to find that approximately the most highly trafficked times during those days are going to be kind of like late morning into early afternoon. That's when I try to post our primary Audio Shocker content. You don't have to post your stuff on those times and days. It's really up to you. I mean, I think it kind of all depends on your fan base and what you want to cultivate, which we'll get to later on in community. For me, we decided from the get-go that Tuesday was going to be our podcast day. And we religiously posted on Tuesday. I used to be a little bit less consistent than I am now, but now I try to make sure the episodes are up in between 10 and 12 on Tuesdays. And I feel like that we've created an expectation with our listeners that that's when content's going to be up. And it feels really good when somebody comes to your blog when something's late and they're like, hey, where is it? I'm excited, I'm waiting for this. They'll leave a comment or they'll say something on one of your social media profiles, something like that.
And we've tried to create like a schedule for our podcast where we've said, it's going to be at this time. It might not be, obviously Nick likes to post in the morning when he can, but you might be out of town the night before, whatever. But as long as you can get it up that day, or if you can't get it up in the morning, maybe you put up like a short blog post saying
or
hey,
tweet about it. I think that's a great new way to do it.
Yeah, it'd be like, hey, it's coming soon, or we just finished recording it. We'll try to get it up as soon as we can, and then people sort of lean into that. They're like, all right, cool, that's great. They're engaging with me, they're trying to be informative, and it sort of also creates the extra expectation for yourself to say, okay, I committed to this a second time, I've got to get it out there.
And the other nice thing about it too is that once you create that expectation of a schedule like this, you can almost build people up to it, so you can remind them the night before that maybe you recorded or you're editing right then, and you create a little bit of anticipation and excitement around the debut of your episode.
Right, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the last one, the community.
Right, definitely.
I think Seinfeld has a whole talk about this where he buys these really big wall calendars, and every day that he writes, he's like, I gotta write every day. He throws a big red X on it. So obviously you're probably not gonna podcast every day, but it's sort of like you can do that in your mind. And like every time you podcast, it's a giant red X over the day, and you've like created this continuous chain. And you never want to break the chain if possible. Like it's all about just getting that practice, getting it done, and I think your listeners will appreciate that. I mean, I think they'll understand that not every episode's gold. I think for us, it'd be really hard for us to say every episode's gold.
It's more like every episode's crap, but we keep doing it anyway.
Exactly.
I would say that's generally our ethos.
Exactly. Yeah. But because you keep doing that, you learn how to like improve every single time you do it. And maybe part of consistency is being like, we're always going to record for 15 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Or you're going to do it for 30 minutes. And I think time actually plays into when you want to post too. So if it's a shorter podcast, like if you're doing 20 minutes, you can probably get away with sort of more early weekday things where people can listen to it during the day on their lunch break or something. But if you want to do a really long podcast, maybe towards the end of the week where people are, then have some more free time during the weekend, that's another option. So you can play around with that a little bit. But once you find a day, as Nick said, you try to stick with it.
Yeah, I mean, listeners are never going to do what you expect them to do. That's like, I feel like the number one rule of sharing content online. Your audience is going to do whatever the hell it does whenever it wants to do it, which is cool, but as long as there's an expectation, you can at least cultivate somewhat of a devoted following as opposed to it being more scattered. That's my opinion, of course. Not everybody who podcasts is going to agree with me, but that's my general philosophy. At least that motivates me to keep going and stay on the ball and not miss episodes and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so character. This one, I feel like, is something that most podcasters do naturally without even thinking about it. But I think that being a little bit more premeditated with it can really enhance not only your enjoyment of recording, but also the way that you promote yourself, which is, of course, something we'll get into later with community. My idea, or not my, what we're asking you to do on this character line right here is pick 3 words that you would like to describe your podcast. They can be any 3 words you want, but keep it simple and think of it as like, you walked up to Neal on the street, just met him, pick 3 words to describe his personality when you ran into him. Think of it the same way, somebody's first impression of coming to your show. That's our idea with that section there. I think for us, it depends on the given series that you're talking about. For the show that Neal and I record together, the Audio Shocker podcast, the flagship one, we would probably say,
I think raw.
Yeah, raw. Maybe argue. And cheeky.
Cheeky. Mature. No,
Yeah,
not mature at all, actually.
Neal and I, actually, we get along terrific in real life. We're very good friends. But on the podcast, we spend a lot of time arguing. Not just because we disagree with each other on things, but it's kind of become our rapport over the years. So it's
fractious.
Fractious. Very nice.
That's the right word.
I mean, that sucks.
Fractious is a good word.
I was trying to argue with you.
Yeah.
So,
it's
kind of like people have this expectation. They tune into the Audio Shocker podcast, they're going to hear us bickering with each other. If they've heard it before, that's the expectation. And it's fun because we get to play it up in the notes underneath the episode that we post. We can, kind of, for lack of a better word, fuck with each other when we're recording, which is, I mean, look, you got to keep yourself interested in this. You're not going to be able to have consistency if you're not excited to sit down and record. I was listening to this podcast, the interview by a comic book artist by the name of Brandon Graham, and he felt that his job is not to make comics, it's to keep himself excited about making comics. And I thought that was a great quote, because I feel like as a podcaster, it's not just about making the podcast, it's about being motivated to keep podcasting. And a big part of that is having fun with it. And I think that we generally enjoy the sort of cranky arguing that we do on our show.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be a chore, otherwise you're just going to stop doing it.
Right, which we've encountered. I mean, it's been an obstacle, but we worked through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you don't have character, I mean, it's like basic marketing, right? Like, without some differentiation, no one just wants to hear some monotone guy drone on about the Avengers. Or maybe you do. I don't know. But unless that's the character you're going for, I think you can probably do something more compelling, and you'll enjoy it more.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Any questions about character? No?
All right, let's talk about community.
Not the TV show, which is great. Coming back soon. Or probably never, actually.
The goal for this community one is to figure out which networks, which channels of promotion you want to use, and then how you want to encourage people to interact with you. So in the first space, what we're suggesting is writing down the, let's say, social media you'd like to use to promote your show. Now for us, we're kind of maybe a little bit too sprawl. We use Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and Tumblr every time we post a new episode. I hit up all those areas and put the stuff up.
And I mean, part of the benefit of that is, I'm sure as you all know, you can automate a significant portion of that, right? Like, you know, if you post something on WordPress like we do, like you can have all your other social media services pick it up. That's obviously one way to do it, and I think Nick takes this a little further, which I think works really well by actually doing more dedicated posts on each of those channels. So it's one thing to be like, hey, new episode available. It's another to say, new episode available, and then here's what's in it. And it gives them a little bit more of a snippet. So I mean, do try to be a little bit more personal in your promotion efforts, as opposed to just letting sort of that RSS version take care of it for you.
I agree with that. I actually do not believe in automating your social media feeds anymore. I think the problem is that, you know, what happens is it posts multiple times on your Facebook from different accounts. It starts to look really sloppy. You know, your listeners are like, I already hit like on that. Am I supposed to hit like on this next one? I feel like it dilutes your presence. That's my opinion on it. I'm not everybody's going to agree with me on that. And it's fun because you can continue the character of your episodes into your community interactions by personalizing it when you post them. So it takes you an extra 20, 30 minutes to post it on those social networks. But what if that means that you have 10, 20, 30 more dedicated listeners coming to you and respecting the way that you post it because you did it that way? To me, that would be worth it. That's my feeling on it.
And the second line, we're talking about encouraging interaction. Nick and I were talking about this, and it doesn't have to be the same platform, right? And this is something that you need to help influence, but you also need to let your audience sort of take it. So this is very popular with webcomics, which I know it's a bit of a departure, but when a lot of webcomics get started, they'll create their own forums on the site for people to talk about the comic, or they'll see that, you know, wherever that discussion's happening, they want to create that community. And so by encouraging people to use a particular platform, or sort of thinking about how you want them to interact with your content, you can sort of direct where that conversation goes. And so you can essentially choose where you want that to happen.
Yeah. In my opinion, I think you have a few primary things that you could focus on. You could set up forums if you wanted to for your podcast. I personally don't recommend that unless you've already got a huge listener base, because you're going to be very disappointed when you find out that you got like 2 people posting your forums every month. You know what I mean? We personally like to direct people to our blog comments. So we encourage things within our show notes underneath the episodes, and we encourage things within other outreach that we do. You know, kind of go to the blog and leave a comment. And people have become accustomed to that. And so, like, you know, for a show, for example, like Sequential Underground or a podcast with Ross and Nick, are very information-heavy comics shows, we get some really awesome conversations started in the comments because we ask people to give us feedback there.
Right, and if people are coming to your website to consume the content, which I think is probably becoming less and less true, you can still bring them there and have them interact with the content. And by seeding some of that information, by like leaving the first comment,
right,
you're throwing out additional questions. You're showing that there's other content that's available that's not just the podcast, it's not just the Twitter account. I mean, it's something else for them to engage with, and that you're really reaching out to them very personally by replying to comments and everything.
Yeah, reply to all your comments. Don't be ashamed to comment, even if nobody else has. Maybe with an add-on to it, or a video, or a link or something that you spoke about that you didn't put in the show notes. You know, another option is you could encourage people to make your Facebook page really active. But I think if that's what you're going to do, you got to really focus. You know, when you're recording an episode, say, hey, hop onto our Facebook page and let us know what you think. Or, after we post this, we're going to put something up on our Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you. Let them know that's where you want them to interact. Because if you want them to interact on a wide space of things and you're not directing them to one of them in particular, your audience isn't really going to know where to go. People are shy when it comes to commenting anyway. In fact, on our latest episode of Sequential Underground, we got into this a little bit, and in the comments, we're talking about commenting right now. And some people say, I just don't really feel comfortable commenting all the time. And I can understand why they would say that. And I think it's if you create an environment where they know there's a place to go, they're not going to be the only person talking about it, and you're going to respond to them, they're going to feel comfortable interacting with you then.
Right. I mean, very no judgments environment. Or, if you choose to play your character there, you can do that too.
Mm-hmm.
It's your character.
It's true. You don't have to necessarily be yourself. Part of the advantage of doing this sort of thing is you can be a little bit outside of yourself. So if Neal and I wanted to, we don't really do this, we could continue our sort of like arguing persona into our comments. And it'd be another fun thing we could do. On some webcomics I've done, I've actually had the characters comment on it. And it's like, it's a comment starter by doing that. It's not something I do all the time, but it can be a fun thing to do when you want some discussion to get going.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, pretty much fills out the worksheet. Do you guys have any questions about the worksheet or figuring out any of those areas for your content?
Or any roadblocks in general?
Yeah.
So I just started a podcast. It's a podcast where we interview graphic design professionals, and so we're looking to build the audience. It's Pittsburgh based, but we do talk about design in general. We'll have people on as guests that aren't necessarily in Pittsburgh. So how would you suggest growing that audience? We're using Facebook, we're using Twitter. We're getting our friends to post. Is there a way to accelerate our audience?
That's a toughie, because how long ago did you start?
We have 6 episodes and we're posting bi-weekly. So,
do you also have editorial content that you post on the same website that you're doing along with the podcast, or is it just audio right now?
Well, we're with AIGA, which is the graphic designer organization. So we have that base to go from. But there's 22,000 people associated with that organization. So,
are you on a dedicated blog for this podcast?
Yeah, we're on the AIGA website.
Okay, but it's do you have your own category within it? How does
we have our own page? Yeah, on the website.
And is it set up so it's a page that populates with individual posts, so people can comment on the individual episodes?
I think how it is now, there's just links on one landing page and it takes you to a separate page for that.
In that case, you're not really going to be able to encourage a lot of interaction on that particular landing page. I would say, if there's a way, that's an instance where I feel like social media could really be a great way to get that interaction going, especially a Facebook page for it.
Right.
Because you've already got all those people in AIGA who are interested in that. Graphic designers love to talk and engage in graphic design. They're really passionate people, and you're passionate artists. So I feel like you have a great opportunity with that. It sounds like you have a very narrow focus to what you're doing. Not narrow in terms of design, but you are specifically focusing on graphic design, that's actually a benefit to what you're doing. Because when you can fill that niche like that, you're going to be able to get that community interaction quicker. I think maybe start, when you do an episode, brainstorm a topic that you could have people riff on after the episode. Do you already have a Facebook page set up?
Yeah, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, and we ask, what we do is we ask the community, hey, we're interviewing this guest. Do you have any questions for them?
That's a toughie though, man. I feel like that's good, but I've never gotten a lot of response from people and things like that.
Yeah, we're not getting any.
You got to do it afterwards. After you post the episode, go there and be like, on our latest episode, we spoke to so-and-so, and this is what we talked about. What do you think about that? Ask them a specific question, and the best way to do it is to get the people involved in the podcast the first ones to comment. It's like, if you guys are commenting first, do you have co-hosts with you on this episode?
Yeah, there's one other co-host.
You guys start the discussion. There's no shame in that. Even if it's just the two of you and one other person, there's nothing wrong with that. Ask your friends, be like, look, man, we just put up this thing. Could you leave a couple comments on it? Could you offer me, directly email a few people? There's really nothing wrong with doing that. We used to do that all the time.
Yeah, something else that might help if you're just trying to grow, the listenership is if you can get guest posts. Not just audio content, but something that's also very easy to consume. Like a short paragraph or a short post or a longer explanation of something you talked about on the podcast. Mm-hmm. If you can get that by a guest or someone you had on the podcast or someone else from the community, you can get them to bring their social graph also to the website and to the blog and to the podcast, and you can start to sort of pick up people that way. And I think there's a lot of new like metadata tags you can use. So like if you use the person's name, then if they search for them, then like it'll immediately bring them to articles that are written on your site too.
Right.
And so it's another way to sort of capitalize on other people's names. And there's nothing wrong with that because it's obviously stuff they've written. It's stuff that's it's good publicity for them and it's good publicity for you because it's bringing people to you, just based on search traffic. And so it's a great way to take advantage of some really free SEO.
The way your episodes are set up, do you have like an image that's featured with each episode and stuff like that?
No image.
That's something that's worth doing. I feel like, when we started posting images with each of our episodes, it was like the interaction and interest went up. People want that visual component when they're on the web. And doing that, it just made a huge difference for us. So now what I do is I don't just use those images for posting on, do you want to show them like one of the podcasts? Like maybe do like the most recent Sequential Underground. That was a great example, one that worked well. We don't just put up the image there, then I take that image and when I post it on Facebook, I add that image to the Facebook post. So it's something for people to look at. I'll tweet that image, I'll put that image on Tumblr or something like that. Yeah, sure, that's fine. Feature an image, a couple of images actually is my general rule now with my podcast posts. I feature 2 images along with it, and so it brands it a little bit, and it makes it specific to that episode. And plus, images just kill on Google results, so it's like,
Right.
That's another thing you'll get traffic on just in general over time. I don't know if there's a great way to jumpstart community interaction, but you can definitely get the ball rolling by being focused and deliberate with it. And don't expect people to interact before the episode. You want to get them going as soon as you drop the episode. They're not really going to do much before. People are generally apathetic, and if they don't already have content, there's less incentive for them to interact.
And there's probably, if you do your podcast weekly, I think you can realistically expect interaction for a week and a half, unless it's a really strong thread. And
that's long in some ways too. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, great suggestions.
You're welcome. I hope it goes well. You're a baby right now with the podcast. You know what I mean? It's like it's a baby show, and it's going to take time to grow. We didn't really get taken seriously, I don't think. And honestly, we weren't really hitting our stride until maybe 100 episodes in. I know that sounds like a big time commitment, but it's just the way it was for us.
Mm.
Everybody's different, of course.
Yeah, like your podcast does not need to be longer than 30 minutes. Depending on what the topic is, depending on what the subject is, I think the shorter the better. When we started, our first podcast was 2 hours long. It was ridiculous. It was just like 2 hours of us like just trying to figure out what it was we were trying to do. And I think maybe the first 10 were probably like an hour long after that.
Yeah, but you know what's funny? There was a couple of years we were limiting all of our episodes to 30 minutes. And recently, I found that my co-hosts that I work with don't want to be limited with time. They want to just keep talking. So it's almost like, I've sort of gone full circle with some of the other shows that we do, where now these people just want to keep going for 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I'm not going to stop them if they want to keep talking, and they get hits. But I personally prefer to listen to an episode that's 30 minutes long. I got other stuff to do.
That's right.
Do you guys have any other questions? Are there any podcasts that you really enjoyed listening to that maybe you feel like you'd like to try and emulate with your shows? Did anybody see Looper?
Was it good?
Yeah, what do you think?
Thought the ending could have been a little bit better.
I agree with that.
Cool. Well, if you guys don't have anything else, then we're done. That's it.
And if you do, you can always you can reach me and Nick via Twitter. I'll raise this up in a second, and you can get our Twitter handles and do all that fun stuff.
Do you guys feel like you got out of this session what you were hoping to get out of this session? Okay. You guys are kind of quiet crowd. As we stood.
I think this is really smartly, concisely put together.
Thank you very
I just
much.
want to say,
I appreciate
but
that.
I totally dig that.
Thank you.
This is a strong outline, and a lot of people forget these things. I do all the time, so I appreciate
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
All right. I got a question.
Sure, what's up?
There was actually a good discussion in one of these guys' sessions earlier about stats and stuff like that. Do you ever find yourself, you've been doing it a long time, have you ever find yourself kind of obsessing over the numbers, but you mostly keep it aside, or?
We definitely did it when we started.
Yeah.
It was something where like we used WordPress stats and we compared it against the Podpress stats, and I think briefly we looked at Google Analytics. We could never get the numbers to match up, and you have to not do it for the stats.
That's how I
really
feel
has to
that
be
way too.
for you. So like you can go back and look, and you can be like, oh, like in the space of 2 months, these podcasts did really well, and these one didn't. And I think you'll find out that based on search traffic, if you talk about something that's really popular, you'll start to get huge traffic on it. And I mean that's just kind of obvious. Like people are searching for stuff, your stuff will bubble up to the top. But unless you're really looking for, I mean, I'm just not sure where. I don't know if listens is the engagement or visits is really the metric of engagement that you should be using for your podcast. I mean, it depends entirely on what you're looking for. But if actual response from the community is what you're looking for, like your blog comments, your retweets, your side comments on that stuff, you've got to be much more important than just how many people downloaded your podcast.
Do you ever play the claw machine?
Not me, but I watch my friend go at it every day.
I like the claw machine a lot. It's one of my favorite things to do.
It's actually really good, the claw machine, by the way.
Thank you, Neal.
Maybe next year he'll teach a podcast.
Yeah, maybe I'll have a claw machine session at the next podcast. It's one of my hobbies, and I know it's like gambling basically because you don't know what that claw is going to be like. You don't know, maybe there's something unseen that's wedged, and you think you can get that stuffed animal, but you actually can't. You don't know if you're on your top game. You don't know how many coins you got in your pocket sometimes, And I feel like stats are similar to that, where it's like, you can look at those stats and you can see it, but it's not really representative of what people are getting out of your show or how deeply they're engaging with it, or even what your actual stats are. Because sometimes we use Podpress as our podcasting plugin through WordPress. And sometimes we'll be like, how come this episode says it has 8,000 streams and our normal numbers are like 500? 8,000? That doesn't make any sense. Like, obviously something is wrong with whatever they were using on this one episode. And I see that all the time with our stuff. It's all over the map like that. So I feel like I play the claw machine because I enjoy the novelty of it. I look at stats because I enjoy the novelty. But I measure our success in the interaction, the direct feedback we get from people, the interaction we encourage and the interaction we receive. However, if you're interested, because I guess we have a few minutes left still, I could share my secret traffic strategies with you.
Secret?
If people are interested in that.
Yeah.
Okay. I used to work in marketing, and I studied a lot of SEO for this job that I had. And at first, I thought the best way to do it was through putting a ton of tags on your blog posts and just whatever, a bunch of other stuff that they tell you. But really, at the end of the day, I found there are two things that'll increase your traffic: images and lists. So occasionally, when I'm like, man, you know what? We really need to, we got a little downslide in our traffic, or I'd like to get a little traffic, or I'll give you a great example. We'd like to make a few bucks off of Amazon with Amazon associate links, selling like movies and comics and stuff like that. I'll make a list, and I'll make the list image heavy. And it can be related to things we talk about, but it's very focused. And I do two things with the images. One, I make sure the images are clear and they fit the width of my blog. If people are going to your blog and they see images that are like way narrower than your text and stuff like that, I don't know, man. I don't think that really looks so good. I think you got to know the width of your text and you got to make an image fit that. But you got to have two kinds of that image. You have to have a large version of that image, and you got to have the smaller blog width size version of that. And I personally believe in sizing them manually in an image program like Photoshop, uploading them, linking to the larger image from the blog width one, right? And Google picks it up because, and make sure the name of the image, the file name, is very clearly stating what that image is, because Google's looking at your file name, Google's looking at the content of the image, and then they're looking at the text in your blog post, right? And they're going to see that text references that name that's in the image title, like the actual file name, right? And if you want to, you can put an alt tag on that image. I don't know if you're familiar with that. If you're not, you can look it up, ALT tag. And you can put what that image is on there. And, I'll tell you what, I'm a big War Machine fan from the Iron Man movies and comics and stuff like that. Actually, I don't like him in the movies. I love him in the comics. But anyway, point is, huge War Machine fan. I'm one of a select, proud few. There aren't really that many people that like this character very much who are into comic books. And when the Iron Man movie came out, we had a wealth of War Machine content on our website. And I have been very careful to have lots of large images that looked good, that were linked from our website. And when the movie hit, our traffic shot up 3 times the usual traffic. in May of 2010 when Iron Man 2 came out and War Machine was in it, and it continued on through maybe July of that year. If I had been a little bit more savvy then, I would have had some more strategies to help us make a few dollars off of all that traffic. But it just ballooned, and we had tons of people coming to our site to download wallpaper I used to post and check out the War Machine lists I posted and stuff like that. And that was when I really knew that this sort of lists and images strategy worked. The reason why I say lists is because it gives you an opportunity to categorize stuff and to direct people towards products and to direct people towards, I don't know, specific content. You know, people like that sort of ordered, organized thinking.
People also just like curated lists.
Right. And Google likes lists. And Google will send you to lists when you go to search for things, right? So lists get you in on the main page of Google search, you know, the Google web search, and then your images get you in on the image side of it. And that will boost your traffic. I think the thing to be careful of is don't overdo it, because then you'll have what I consider false traffic, which is what we had a lot of for years. And I actually went through our blog posts and deleted a lot of tags and took out stuff that I felt was directing people to our site that wasn't causing them to stick around. They weren't genuinely there for the other content we offered. They were just, you know, whatever, like window shoppers. You know what I mean? And we were getting a ton of spam and stuff. So I was like, well, let's calm this down a little. Let's focus it. But, you know, when we need to, we can still take advantage of that. So that's it. That's my secret strategy. It will work if you dedicate yourself to it, but it's kind of a pain in the butt.
Do you have that up somewhere, like broken out?
No, I never wrote it down.
Oh, it sounds like a valuable chunk.
Yeah, thanks.
Maybe it'll be on our next list.
Yeah, maybe. And lots of images of me making lists.
Cool. Well, I mean, if you guys have any other questions, like I said, you can always reach us. Ron Jeremy couldn't make it today.
Yeah, he could. You know what? He's busy.
He's busy traveling through airports with the trash bags. You guys ever seen the movie about Ron Jeremy? Like, such a weird guy.
He's the world's cheapest man.
He is. He's the world's cheapest man.
That's a secret to staying rock solid in business.
That's right. Well, thank you all again.
Thanks for joining us. Sorry to you who just walked in.